Good evening. Good evening. Thanks for coming. I'm Ben Reese. I've been working here for a few years, and this May will be my last time at Duke. So after coordinating the Martin Luther King events for 17 or 18 years, this is kind of mixed feelings to be here. But we have a really very special and dynamic speaker this evening. I'd like to ask people to remember that this cannot be recorded, video, audio, and I've been told that it's live streamed, so I've been told to ask you not to stand up and walk around. But we take the Martin Luther King event seriously, not only as a time when we can get together and reflect on Dr. King's legacy, but more importantly, to re-energize us to act. Because certainly when I reflect on our society and what's happening, it really requires action in whatever way, in whatever form that takes, but it's not a time to sit back. So I want to welcome you and thank you for coming. And I'd like to call on another special guest, Nolan Smith, to come here and introduce a very special speaker. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm so honored to be standing here to introduce this special guest. When he responded to my direct message to come down here, I was shocked but excited that he would give us the honor of just blessing us with his presence. He's hailed by Time magazine as one of the 25 most influential people in the world on the internet. SHAUN King is the CEO of the North Star, co-founder of the Real Justice PAC, a columnist for The Intercept, and the voice of social justice on the legendary Tom Joyner Morning Show. King's work brings striking clarity to the insidious and complicated picture of racism today. His is a new kind of advocacy. Using social media, he bravely spearheaded efforts to identify and bring to justice more of the violent white supremacists who terrorized Charlottesville than the FBI and state police combined. His social good campaigns have changed laws, ousted corrupt politicians, and elected promising new ones across the country. As a journalist, King has authored an astounding 15,000 articles on injustice since the start of the Black Lives Matter movement. We've entered a new civil rights movement, and King is one of its most powerful and compelling voices. We're honored to have him with us today, so please join me in welcoming Mr. SHAUN King.
Duke, good to see you. So honored to be here. How many of you came here from a tent? I saw those tents on campus. I've seen those tents on television before, that's one thing, but to see people in tents. I lived in Los Angeles, and where I come from, if you live in tents, you may be on Skid Row and homeless. Here it just means you're trying to go to a Duke basketball game. Thank you for having me. I'm honored. Thank you for that introduction. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here with you all. I have some things I hope to teach about tonight. I do hope that you leave inspired, but I'm really hoping you leave with some insight that will help you understand where we are in our country right now, how we got here, and how to get out of where we are. And we'll take some questions and stuff as well. But I am glad to be here. I do have to tell you that I did not tell my mother that I was speaking at Duke because we're from Lexington, Kentucky. I'm not joking. I literally did not tell my mother. Because in Lexington, you just don't go to Duke unless you have to go to Duke. And I haven't lived in Kentucky since 1997. And I think you understand, some places you're born and, you know, I grew up there, but it was definitely not the place I wanted to stay. But I did grow up a huge Kentucky basketball fan, and I know that makes you nervous. I was even advised to not even tell you that. I was watching as a little kid when Christian Laettner destroyed my dreams. Are you clapping for me or for Christian Laettner? I would think I was probably in 3rd grade. He actually stepped on a man in that game. He did do that, so I hope you don't clap for that. But yeah, y'all did. Y'all got one. But I'm actually proud because Duke basketball is principled. And you have so many amazing leaders that are a part of the program. And college athletics are often very problematic. And I don't even have to unpack all of the elements there. But Duke tries hard to get it right and treats the athletes as much as they can like family. And there are even some current and former athletes here. But I know how much you all love Coach K, and he's an amazing leader. So I am bragging about Duke, but I do know, and many of you know, every school, every college and university has its problems, and I want to acknowledge that Duke is still and fighting through and wrestling through ways that it could be better. And it has not arrived. And many of you have experienced these problems firsthand. And part of my job when I come to a university is to be able to keep it real about the problems while I'm on the mic, because you may not get the mic and be able to say it yourself. But I got to spend some time with Mr. Reese, who was up here earlier. Is this your 23rd year? It's his 23rd year. He's given a huge chunk of his life to this institution. And I will say this, and I'll transition. How many of you are students here at Duke currently? Students, raise your hand, raise your hand. Like, it's in your best interest that you be proud of this institution. Your degree is going to be from here. And for me, that also means holding Duke accountable. And so I don't ever want anybody to tell you that it's problematic for you to try to help make Duke better, because you have invested years of your life and thousands of dollars being here, and it's not antithetical to being a student or a graduate to try to make this place better. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's in all of our best interests when there's an institution that we love and support that we don't just accept it the way it is. And I'm glad I was able to speak to several administrators today and talk about ways the university could be better. And if there's ever any way that I can help you, particularly if you're a student, to hold Duke accountable, call on me and I'll do it. Schools do hate bad publicity. So I am normally the person people call when they're ready to turn up the heat on something. And so if you ever need that, just let me know. But that might mean that you never see me on this campus ever again. So I'm going to be super brutally honest, even with some challenges and mistakes that I've made. And I hope to tell you some parts of my story of things I've learned over these past few years. But part of what I hope to impress upon you, and I got a chance to speak to some student leaders earlier, is we are in a deeply disturbing point in American history. And there's a book by man has a brilliant mind, Malcolm Gladwell, called Blink. And read the book, but I can give you a short synopsis of it, and I hope you take this lesson with you. In the book, he basically says that your gut, he could have called, a book called Gut is not nearly as cool as a book called Blink. He could have called it Gut, but the book is about what the profound depth of a thought that you have in the blink of an eye. The book is about trusting your gut, trusting your instinct. And what he says is we have a tendency to think that the thought you have in the blink of an eye is actually something you should dismiss or throw away. And what he's saying is, no, 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 no. Actually, that is probably the truest version of who you are. Like the thought you have when something doesn't sit right with you, when something doesn't feel true to you. The book unpacks how the reality is that the thought you have in the blink of an eye I'm 39 years old. It took 39 years to create all of the depth that's in that thought from a blink of an eye. Am I making sense? And here's what I know. Every single day in this country, every one of us are now not having one moment or two moments, but we're having moments all throughout the morning, day, and night where we see stuff and we're like, this is not right. Like you've seen it, you felt it, and you're just like, yeah, this is wrong. I had dinner with a group here earlier tonight, and I brought up the fact that just a few hours ago, Nancy Pelosi sent a letter you may have seen. I posted it on my Instagram, sent a letter to Donald Trump saying, no, you're not going to do the State of the Union. And if you do it, it's not going to be in the House of Representatives. Well, we're not doing it until the government opens up again. And I'm not even talking about how I feel about that statement, but when I read it, I'm like, this is not normal. That we live in the time where Congress is telling the president, you won't do the State of the Union. Like, it's a complicated, disturbing time. I was very disturbed. Donald Trump has become huge fans of the high school students from Covington Catholic High School. And not only did he invite them to come to the White House, he has found that it's an issue that resonates deeply with his base. And so now he has resorted to tweeting about it constantly. And whatever side you come down on that, and I'll be the first to say, it was a nuanced, America's complicated. It was a complicated, weird situation where you have black Hebrew Israelites, Native Americans, and white Trump-supporting teenagers all within about 3 inches of each other's face. That's not going to go well. There was no way that situation was going to work out well. And there were adults there who should have intervened and didn't, and it was a mess. But it wasn't the type of situation where those kids aren't heroes. Like, divorce yourself from whatever. That was not a heroic moment. And there are so many people that deserve a White House invitation, and it's like, oh, that's who you chose? And so it's just a peculiar time. And I want to unpack how we got here and hopefully leave you with something hopeful to show you how we get out of here. I want to give you a tool. I think there's nothing that would bother me more than showing up somewhere at 7 o'clock and being with somebody for a couple hours and not leaving with something substantive. So I hope you leave here with a tool that helps you better understand society. Let me tell you a story. Before you knew me, I was working at an environmental charity called Global Green. Did anybody here know I did that? If you said, are you lying? Whoever raised you did not know that. I was the director of communications for this international environmental charity called Global Green. And this was in 2014. I had been an organizer and an activist. I had organized around police brutality before. I'm 39, and so I was a college student from 1997, an undergrad from 97 to 2001. And when I was a sophomore at Morehouse, a young brother named Amadou Diallo, who was just 2 years older than me at the time, 21 years old, was shot 41 times on the doorstep of his home in New York. And for us, as teenagers at Morehouse, literally, he was unarmed, nonviolent, had not broken any law, done nothing wrong at all. He was I've come to know his mother, Kadiatu, who's like a queen, saintly queen of a woman, and she's a mother to other mothers who've experienced what she has experienced. And he was just a brilliant man, and we have a stereotype of African immigrants, like they were a family of wealth and means who moved to the United States for Amadou to go to college and pursue his dreams. They were there by choice. And he was shot and killed on the doorstep of his home 41 times. 5 different officers, like a firing squad, unloaded their guns on this man. And that was, for many of us, that was our Mike Brown moment all the way back in 1999. It was our Ferguson. And a group of us, I was student government president at the time, and a group of us organized around that. Almost 7 years later, in 2006, again in New York, there was a young brother named SHAUN Bell, and I follow his wife is still on social media and does amazing work. And literally, SHAUN at the time, I think, was 23 years old. And on his wedding day, hours before he was supposed to get married, was shot 50 times by the NYPD, literally leaving a gathering with his friends. Again, unarmed, nonviolent, broke no laws, did nothing wrong. And I don't mean like on the low he did something wrong. He did nothing. And this was before social media. There was no Facebook. There was no Twitter. I don't know if there was MySpace. And most of you in the room don't even know what MySpace was. Like, you're like, what's that? They don't even remember that. But we organized. But I got married. My wife and I have known each other since we were in high school. I'm 39. We've been together since we were 15 and 16 years old. And I got married. We had kids. We lived in Atlanta for almost 20 years, moved to Los Angeles, had several different jobs. And I was working at Global Green in July of 2014. And I got an email. Your life can change in fast ways that you could never predict. I literally wonder if I had not gotten this email, if my life would be what it is now. I got an email from a guy that I went to Morehouse with, a friend of mine from Morehouse. And a friend of his, my friend and his friend lived in New York. A friend of his had just posted a video on YouTube. And so much has changed since 2014. Like, if we just paused for a moment to remember how different the nation was 5 years ago, it's hard to even add up how much it's changed in 5 years. There had never been a viral video of police brutality. That was not a thing. And my friend sent me this video that was on YouTube, and he said, "Shaun, man, there is a video on YouTube, and there's a middle-aged black man on a street corner, and he's begging the officers to leave him alone, and he's telling the officers he didn't do anything." And he said an officer comes up behind him and begins choking him. And my friend described it like a UFC choke. And he said the officer wrestled the man to the ground. He said, "Shaun, you can hear the man yelling out, 'I can't breathe, I can't breathe.'" And he said, "Shaun, it's on video. The man dies right there on the sidewalk." And I'm at my job, and we had an open office where everybody could see what you're looking at. And I hadn't clicked on the link yet, and I didn't even know if I wanted to click on it. Like, there's a piece of us, a part of us that's become numb because now we've seen so much death, but I had never seen anything like that before. I clicked on the link. I expected there to be part of that story that my friend had left out, because what he explained to me was murder. And I clicked on the link, and it was just as my friend described, but worse. We didn't know the man's name yet. The man was Eric Garner, who literally breathed his last breath right there on that Staten Island sidewalk. And I can't explain what happened, but I was so shook by watching him be alive and then be dead, all in a span of about 3 minutes, with no gun, no knife. Like it is, the video is worse than most of us remember. It's a 12-minute video, and for 8 of those minutes, he's just dead on the sidewalk, and literally cops are still talking to him. After he dies, they handcuff him, and it's like it's a disturbing thing. Literally, I never worked for Global Green again. If you've ever lived in Southern California, I had a long drive home, and I just couldn't shake it. I didn't quit my job officially for several weeks, but I literally stopped being, like, they shouldn't have even paid me my last few paychecks. Like, I literally never had a productive day there again, and eventually I just let them know, like, hey, I'm doing this other thing, and what I'm seeing is, and they were kind and graceful about it. And I had the thought, and it sounds dumb now, but it sounded sensible back then. I had the thought, if I can share this video, somebody is going to see this video and understand that this is illegal, that somebody needs to be held responsible. And my thought is, I'm going to make sure people see this video. So I literally found, at the time, like now there are apps that help you illegally download videos from YouTube. But there were not apps for that at the time. I couldn't find out how to get that video. And eventually I found out how to get the video from YouTube, shared it to Facebook. I was not a public figure. Just shared it to my friends and family on Facebook, because I knew that I had a friend or a family member, somebody who would know what to do with that. And I broke down in 400 or 500 words what happened and just tried to explain this horrible injustice, thinking that that would lead to justice. Like, it should have. Literally, the man who killed Eric Garner, to this very day, still has not even lost his job. And it's now been 5 years, and the city of New York still says it's under investigation. What does that even mean? 3 weeks later, after that, Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson. I'd never heard of Ferguson before. I didn't know. A buddy of mine texted me, literally, it had probably been about 45 minutes or so after Mike was shot and killed. And at the time, you could not stream. There was no Facebook Live. There was no Instagram Live. They didn't exist. People, when they stream live, they would use like a live stream app at the time. And there were several people who started live streaming the scene there. And a buddy texted me. He said, "Sean, there's a kid laying face first right in the middle of the road. There's blood running down the road." And for the past 3 weeks, I'd just been fighting for justice for Eric Garner. By that time, the whole country knew about Eric Garner. People were already chanting and "I can't breathe." People were already marching in cities and on college campuses across the country. And as we saw this young boy on the street, he literally just graduated summer school, gotten his high school diploma about 2 weeks before that. His father had just gotten married. He was the best man at his father's wedding the previous weekend. And I just didn't understand the situation. I clicked on the live stream video, and there he was. He had not been covered. And it wasn't what I saw that shook me, but what I heard. People were wailing and screaming and crying. And you could tell that these were family members who, like, literally there was a woman screaming. The police would not let her go to this body that was on the street, and they would not let anybody cover him or touch him. And you could just feel the anguish. These weren't protesters. These were like, that's my loved one. How can you tell me I can't touch him? The next day, we learned that a young brother named John Crawford was shot and killed at a Walmart in Ohio. Literally, he was just on the phone talking to his girlfriend who had just had their baby. And somebody called in a lie to say there was an active shooter at the Walmart, and there wasn't. And the police saw John out of fear, shot and killed him, thinking he was some shooter at the Walmart. And I had the thought that we were, in 3 weeks, we were facing something so problematic that I needed to throw my life into figuring out how to solve that. 3 months later, a 12-year-old boy named Tamir Rice was shot and killed just a block from his mother's house at the park over Thanksgiving break. And I started meeting family after family. It was the same week that Mike Brown was shot, a young brother named Ezell Ford was shot and killed in Los Angeles. And it just, each situation, people were unarmed, nonviolent. I had the thought that we were going to organize and get justice for these families. And I met many of these families, and I made a mistake that I still cannot shake to this day. I met with family after family after family, and it was equal parts ego and ignorance. Told these families face to face, hang in there, don't worry, we're going to get justice for your family. And when I told these families this, as cool and confident as I could tell them, there was not a part of me that thought I was exaggerating or lying or overpromising. I just believed it. Hold on. Don't worry, we're going to get justice for your family. And even when I left those houses, I never had the thought, you know what, maybe we're not going to get justice. I saw, you may have to go back in time to remember it, but millions of people around the world began saying Black Lives Matter. Millions of people began saying hands up, don't shoot, I can't breathe. And it's in a span of weeks. And we understood that we were in a moment, and I never could have imagined that each and every one of those families would be denied justice. I tell you what, for 3 years, I told families, hold on, hang in there, we're going to get justice for your family. And it was not until a little over a year ago, a beautiful, brilliant brother named Jordan Edwards, shot and killed by police in Mesquite, Texas, outside of Dallas. And I flew down there to meet with his family. And I have to fight back tears even telling you this story. His father, he was the apple of his father's eye. He had a 4.0 in high school. When some of you in the room become parents, this pain, you'll understand it a little better. But Jordan's mother and father had put everything they had into this boy. And it's not that he was the star of the family. He was an outstanding student athlete. Knocked on that door, and his father answered the door, and it was like a ghost. Like you could see the pain in his face. And I remember I had been a lead pastor, senior pastor for many years before that. And I had to visit many families to talk to them about deaths of their loved one. And it prepared me a little bit for the situation. But I remember as soon as I sat down in their living room thinking, I'm not going to tell this family, hold on, hang in there, we're going to get justice for your family. Because I had told about 100 families that. How many of those families do you think got justice? Not a single family. And it was a pivotal moment for me as I sat down at that table realizing that if I told them that, it might be a lie. That the obstacles were so severe, so outrageous, the hurdles were so hard to overcome. And for the first time in my life, I literally told them almost exactly what I just told you, that I had met with over 100 families, and each and every one of us thought we were going to get justice, and not a single one of us got it. And I told them, I said, that's about what we're working against here. And Jordan's family decided that they would do everything differently than they had seen before. They literally, and it was a complicated moment, they literally told activists and organizers they didn't want anybody to march, they didn't want anybody to protest, They wanted to just try to go about the whole thing differently. And they were literally the first family I'd ever worked with who got any semblance of justice. The officer who killed him was tried, charged, and convicted for murder. And then even with the conviction, it felt like nothing. He was still dead. It was absolutely better than nothing, but about this much better than nothing. It did not at all feel like many of us thought it was going to feel like, because the material circumstances and pain were still there. And so for the past few years, since 2016, I've spent almost every free moment of my life studying how does change actually work. And it's helped me, what I'm about to show you, has helped me understand how we got here and where we go from here. And I'm going to teach you this lesson, all right? How many of you didn't have class today? All right, so y'all will probably be able to follow me just a little bit better, all right? This is Leopold von Ranke. When I first saw this picture of Leopold von Ranke, I have to admit, it was the spring of 2015, January of 2015. I had just gone through probably 4 or 5 of the hardest months of my life, where we fought for justice for Mike Brown, Ezell Ford, John Crawford, Tamir Rice, and got none of it. And it took me maybe a year or two to realize that in January of 2015, I was in a deep depression, that I had never fought so hard, so much, and got so little in return. And I kept it a secret, but I was in grad school at the time. People had already started harassing me and causing problems. I didn't even want people to know that I was in a particular grad school program. So I was in a Master's of History program, and the teacher, the class I was in was the Introduction to Historiography. And historiography is just the study of history. It was a class teaching you how to study how history is told. Because there have been tens of billions of people that have been born, lived, and died over the history of this planet, but only a few of those stories get told. And historiography is teaching you how these stories get told. And the first screen that she throws up is of this man, and I'm in a funk, I'm angry, I'm bitter, I'm frustrated with this country, and I saw this hairy old white man, and she says he's from Germany in the 1800s. And you've probably had, you don't have to say amen, but many of you probably had this moment where you've been in class and you're thinking, why the hell am I in this class? You've probably even had the moment where you thought, why am I even in college? Right? I mean, just where I remember the day after Donald Trump was elected, and I was in New York City that day, and I arrived at I had three of our kids were in elementary school at the time, and I arrived at their school. They were just people just crying in the school. And I remember thinking, like, I don't cry in front of people. It's just, judge me if you want, you know? And so I was like, I got to get out of here before I start crying around these folk. And so I remember just leaving, I had to do a radio show that morning. I literally saw on the streets of New York people hugging and crying on street corners. And I spoke to college students who didn't even know if they were going to go to class the next day. And there are moments where you go through things where you think, I don't even know if school is relevant in my world right now. And I showed up, and she showed this man, and I was like, man, I hated this guy. He didn't do anything. He did nothing wrong. But I kept looking at it, and I'm thinking, like, really? This is like, I had work to do. I had things to do, and I'm like, really? Like, this is what we're going to talk about? And I literally left that class later and immediately tried to drop the class. And I went, you know, if it is at my university the way it is at your university, there's like a place where you can add and drop classes, and it lists all the classes, and it tells you how many seats remain in the class and all of that. I don't know how it is at Duke, but where I went to school, there are only like 3 woke professors in the whole school, and their classes fill up right away. And so the only class that was left was like advanced badminton. And have you ever done that where you want to drop a class and then you look at every class that's left and you're like, I be damn. This all I got? This is all I can choose from? And so I realized I was stuck. I was stuck in this class. I wanted out. I wanted out of this class so bad that I literally just thought, I'm just going to drop the class. It was a part of my core curriculum. It wasn't going to be offered until the next year. And then it can throw off your whole schedule. And I was just like, I'm going to drop this class. I'll just make it up. I'll deal with it later. Talked to my wife, and my wife is the voice of reason in my life, who was like, you better not drop that class. We both did masters at the same time, and she graduated a full 2 years before me. Same number of classes and everything. And it was, I can't take any credit for it. Being in that class was one of the best things that happened to my life. I had to tell you that first part, I can literally I wanted out of it. I thought there would be nothing that I would learn. And the lessons that I learned just in the first few weeks of that class are really what I hope to unpack for you. This is Leopold von Ranke, and most people call him the father of the study of history. And I know for some people, they're not real unless they have a Wikipedia page. So here's like a really good Wikipedia page if you want to check that out. So they call him the father of the study of history. Now, there were historians before him, and you can even go back deep into history. This is a portrait of him in the mid-1800s. He was a German historian. You could go back thousands and thousands of years and find historians from throughout time. So he did not create history, of course. People have written and studied the past for thousands of years, but he did 2 things. He pioneered some of the first college degrees in history. He helped make it into an academic discipline. And the second thing he did is what I'm going to unpack for you now, and I'm writing a book, and in my book I unpack this in great detail. And it's not going to be out, so the books take so long. It's probably going to be, by the time this book comes out, you will forget everything I'm about to tell you. It's supposed to come out in January of 2020, so a year from now. So he created the first exhaustive timeline of human history. Now you have to understand that when he was alive, there was no Google, no internet, no cell phones, no television. Most of the world also had no electricity. Like, think about today when you want to know if something's true. Think about what you do. You grab your phone, you get on the net. Like, none of that was available. His task, what he wanted to do was he wanted to collect thousands and thousands of stories from throughout human history. And this is a collage of 10,000 people. And I think there are only a few people that are on here twice, but I think they made a mistake when they did that. But every time I look at it, I see somebody different. Like, right here is Chewbacca. And I don't quite know how Chewbacca made it onto this collage. But I like to highlight Chewbacca because when Leopold von Ranke began assembling all of these stories, it did not take him weeks or months. It took him nearly 30 years. In fact, he died before he even finished the project. He began assembling every story of every hero, every villain, every artist, every musician, every politician, every warlord, every inventor and creator, every person and place and thing, every war, every famine, every moment in history that he could get a fact for. He would collect information about them and begin putting them in chronological order. And as wild as that sounds, in that way, that had never been done before. And one of the things that he struggled with, again, there is no Google, he would find mythical stories from the past and sometimes struggle to figure out, did that really happen? Like, was there really a John Henry? You know, was there, like when you think of myths even from ancient Egypt or ancient Greece, like he would struggle to sometimes determine, is this real or fact? And so he got all of these stories, thousands and thousands of stories. Like, here's Rerun from What's Happening. And what makes me sad is with every passing year of my life, fewer and fewer of you even know who that is. But later, you should Google Rerun, What's Happening, dance. You got to put dance on. Oh, in the sweater. Do you want to do the dance? I just saw you do part of the dance right there. You just did half of it right there. Google it later. Google it later and you'll see it for yourself. But he began putting all of these stories in chronological order. He wanted to do it because he thought that it would do a few things, but particularly he thought it would help him understand trends in human behavior. So he went all the way back to early human history and began putting human beings in chronological order. And his hope was that it would show him trends and behavior and not help him predict the future, but help him understand maybe what's coming next. And what he found shocked him. As he put all of these stories in chronological order, what he believed was, just imagine for a moment, imagine right here that these are the early humans, okay? All the way here at the beginning of the graph. And imagine that this is, we'll say, 10,000 years ago, just for illustration's sake, okay? Say this is 10,000 years ago of early Homo sapiens, okay? And this is 10,000 years of human history, and say this is us today, okay? This is right now, right here, right now. His thought was that when he put all of these people in chronological order, his thought was that he would see this. His thought, in essence, was that he would see the theory of evolution. Charles Darwin had not yet announced the theory of evolution. It literally would just come a few years after this. But his thought was, von Ranke's thought was that he would see that from the beginning of early humans until present day, the human beings were getting better and better and better and better and better and better. And many people believe that. In fact, that's in essence still how we think human history works. We believe that's the way time unfolds. But when he actually put all of these people in order, in chronological order like this, what he found is that humanity does not look like this. It does not look like this, but it looks like this. That over time, if these are the early humans and this is us today, just as an illustration, that sometimes he would find humanity was great. He found something in South America called 1,000 years of peace, where for 1,000 years there was no known war, no known famine. The people were not perfect, but they were at peace. They respected each other's borders and boundaries. They cooperated. They had conflicts, but they found ways to resolve them. Not for a week or a month, but 1,000 years. He found that sometimes human beings were great, but then humanity would plunge, and then they would claw back only to plunge into something horrible and work their way where their head is barely above water again, and the human beings would plummet again. What he expected was for humanity to look like this, where human beings were steadily getting better over time. But what he realized was that he had confused the steady improvement of technology with the steady improvement of humanity. What he discovered almost 200 years ago was that it is actually true. And this could be 100 years, this could be 1,000 years, it could be 10 years, that over time, our technology gets better and better and better. Our televisions get better. Our computers get better. Our telephones get better. Our means of transportation get better. And he broke it down, like he talked about the advancement of medicine and how in the 1850s, they were just finding out how to put people to sleep during surgery. And that for the previous 10,000 years of human history, when you had surgery, you were pretty much awake. And they had just now started to pioneer it, except he said a lot of times when they were putting people to sleep for surgery, they were not waking back up all the time yet. Like they were just now figuring out how to make that work. We had just moved. I lived in Atlanta for almost 20 years, and I took a job in California. We moved our family out to California, and my daughter, who's in high school now, was starting at a performing arts middle school. And my wife has been a school teacher for all of our marriage, and so in the morning she's already gone off to work, and so it was always my job to take the kids to school. And so I took her to her first day of school. She was not nervous in the least bit. And I'm terrified. We're in a new, like, Georgia and California are like different countries. And like the South is as different from the West as France is from England. Like in most places of the world, the United States would be 8 or 9 different countries. Like literally some people argue that the United States should be 8 or 9 different countries. I remember when I first traveled to Europe for the first time, and we took a train from Paris to London. And in my mind, my whole life, Paris and London were so far apart because they speak different languages. It was like a 90-minute train ride. Like it is, 90 minutes is nothing. That's how close they are. And so we got to the school and dropped her off. And I remember saying to her, I said, she got out of the car. I said, hold on. I said, if you need anything, call me. And she looked me right in my face, and I thought I didn't even understand her response. She said, Dad, I'll call you, but why are you putting your pinky and your thumb on your face like that? And I looked at her like my brain, I had like a could not compute moment. And I looked at her like I had my finger and my thumb here, and she said, I'll call you. I don't know why you're doing that. I said, it's a phone. And literally, she was like, I'll call you. And then I sat there in my car for a minute and realized that for the first 18 years of my life, a phone looked like this. Like, many of you are not old enough to remember, but for the first 16, 18 years of my life, there was one phone in the whole house. This is going to really weird you out. Everybody in the whole house shared that phone. There was one shared phone. It was on the wall of my mother's kitchen. Had a long curly cord attached to it. And the only way you could even try to have a juicy conversation was if you tried to stretch that cord, and then you had to do it, you know, hey baby, hey, what you doing, baby? Yeah. Like that's all you could do. There was all the nastiness that people do on phones today was none of that. Because your mother was right in the next room. Wasn't sending no pictures or none of that type of stuff. You just had to have whisper conversation. And if you had a little bit of privilege, there might be a second phone in the house. This will really weird you out. And other people could pick that second phone up and listen to your conversation. Now, see, y'all are lucky because if other people could listen to your besides the government, if other people could listen to your conversation, half of y'all wouldn't be alive right now, right? And I realized, like, oh, for her whole life, a phone looked more like this than this big weird thing I'm putting on the side of my face, because over time, technology changes. When I was a child, I never could have imagined, this is my cell phone, I never would have imagined that a phone would look like this, that I could watch an entire series of a TV show on a thing called Netflix. Like, I watch more TV on this than I'm even watching on like, I don't even use an actual TV. Like, the idea that technology would change so much would have seemed far-fetched to me. And Von Ranke said, I think I confused the steady improvement of technology with the steady improvement of humanity. Because when he put all of these people in order, humanity looked more like this. I'm not saying, to be clear, I'm not saying that this was Barack Obama and that this is Donald Trump. Now, I may be saying this is Barack Obama and this is Donald Trump. I'm not even talking politically, I'm just talking ethically. Truthfully, it's hard to judge history while you're in it. It's hard to understand it while you're in it. And part of the reason that that can cause problems is history is so hard to understand while you're in it that you may be here and not know it. You could be on your way here and not know that you're here until you're here. Because you don't just wake up and are here. And listen, this from here to here, that may take 10 years. It may take 50 years. And I'm saying one little bitty moment at a time. And all of a sudden, like when I tell people today that we live in a problematic time, nobody disagrees with that. It's just, Sean, what problematic part are you talking about? Because it is so deeply problematic that the struggle isn't determining what problem we're talking about. The struggle is it's just problematic everywhere. That a single day can be so disturbing that by the afternoon you have forgotten about the problematic thing you saw in the morning. There is a tracker written by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist tracking the lies of Donald Trump, and it is now nearing 9,000 lies, and literally they remove all questionable ones. 9,000 proven lies since his election. And what happens is, say this is a chart on honesty in the White House. You just go and you go, and on the first lie, you're like, oh, damn, he's a liar. And then you get all the way down here, and now you're almost numb to it. It's not weird anymore. It's just Wednesday, right? And all of a sudden, you find yourself, you say, what? The government's been shut down for 32 days, what? We're in that. When I flew in today, it broke my heart as I saw TSA workers. Yesterday, they missed their second paycheck. And they still have to work. Like, my whole life, I've lived check to check. I don't even know how they're expected to do this. Did you see the picture of federal government workers standing in line for food? What are we talking about? Remove what you think about it now. If you read all of that in a history book about the 60s, you'd be like, whoa, that is ugly. The government was shut down for a record amount of time. The president told 9,000 lies, and government workers were just standing in line for bread and milk. What are we talking about? Because humanity does not unfold like this. Our gadgets unfold like this, but humanity unfolds like this. Let me push it. If humanity unfolded like this, and we got better and better and better and better over time, these are the early humans, and that's us today, that would mean that we are peak humanity. That would mean that Donald Trump is peak human. I'm just saying, I don't even think Melania believes that. Like, if this is how time unfolds, how do we explain this? This is, if you've ever been to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, you can see this actual This looks like folk art. This is a man's business plan. This is a business plan. A man wanted to determine exactly how many Africans can we fit on this ship. So he commissioned someone to diagram out his business for him, because his business was in the African shipping business. Now, if we're getting better and better over time, if this is early humanity and this is us today, we like to think that this is ancient history, but this right here took place about right there. In the scheme of human history, we like to think that this took place all the way back here or here or here. There was a woman, speaking of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, there was a woman at the grand opening of the museum whose father was born into slavery. There was a woman who voted in this previous election whose father was born into slavery. That's how recent this is. If we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain this? How do we explain the wounds on this man's back? If we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain this? I live in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn has one of the largest surviving populations of Holocaust survivors of any place in the world. Right now, it's believed that there's still, it won't be this way much longer, but there's still about 100,000 survivors of the Holocaust. Not only did 88 million people die during World War II, the deadliest war in the history of the world, but 6 million of those people were literally snatched from their homes, taken to camps, worked to death, starved to death, and murdered. And there are living survivors of it now. In fact, and this should disturb all of us to our soul, survivors of that continue to say publicly, including from the Anne Frank Center, from the Auschwitz Museum, which was one of the deadliest concentration camps, continue to say, hold on here, this feels to us like the years before the Holocaust. They've publicly said it. People who experienced it said, this feels eerily familiar. And that's frightening. If we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain this? How do we explain this is a pile of shoes at a concentration camp that is still there? Because all of the people were brought in and all of their shoes were stripped from them and all the bodies perished, but the shoes are still there. When I was in middle school, if we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain this? When I was in middle school, over 1 million people were hacked to death in Rwanda. To this very day in Rwanda, they continue to find skulls and fragments of skulls, and they treat them as sacred objects because entire communities were hacked to death in just about 95 days or so. I was in middle school. I don't even have to go back to middle school. There is a famine right now in Yemen. There is a deadly civil war, even if that's what you want to call it. It's more like genocide almost in multiple countries. Right now. If we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain all of those things? We explain it because humanity does not work like this. Technology works like this. Humanity looks like this. Let me push it a little bit further and make it modern. If we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain this? Where last year 102 fully unarmed black men, women, and children were shot and killed by American police. Now you may say, Sean, to be honest, I don't know if 102 is big or small. It's just a number. You would have to go back to when this man was president. Does anybody know who this is? I spoke at a middle school recently, and somebody yelled out Jimmy Carter. And I said, oh, my God. No, baby, it is not Jimmy Carter. That is not Jimmy Carter. Anybody want to guess? Not Wilson. No, not Rutherford B. Hayes. What'd you say? No. It's 25th president. Somebody Google 25th president. Lord have mercy. Good thing you're not on Jeopardy right now. You would have lost all your money. You'd have lost every dollar you have. Google it, 25th president. McKinley. Close, close, close. On Jeopardy, they would have called you wrong if you said McKinney. They'd have counted you out. Yeah. Most people struggle to recognize him. He did die when he was in office. This is probably 1902. You would have to go back to when he was president to find the last year that 102 or more African Americans were lynched in this country. So I grew up thinking the deadliest years of lynching were in the 50s or 60s. And in the 50s or 60s, there was still a horrible period for lynching. But in most of those years in the 50s or 60s, it was 8 people, 12 people, just still 8 or 12 too many. You would have to go all the way back to when McKinley was president to find the last year where as many people were killed as were killed by unarmed black men, women, and children were killed by American police. And what is being killed when you're unarmed and nonviolent? What is that if you're killed by police other than legal lynching? I have to tell people all the time, the deadliest hate crime in now almost 100 years, in 2 years it will be 100 years, the deadliest hate crime against African Americans in almost 100 years did not take place in the 40s, 50s, or 60s. It took place in Charleston, South Carolina, when Dylan Roof walked into a church. When he walked into Emmanuel and shot and killed the pastor and 8 other beautiful souls. The deadliest hate crime in almost 100 years against African Americans did not happen in the civil rights movement. It happened on our watch. It's hard to know where you are in history when you're in it. If we're getting better and better and better, how do we explain this? This is the United States state and federal prison population from 1925 to 2014. This could actually go back to the 1800s, the 1700s, the 1615. For almost all of human history, you never had any country that rose above this level. From 1925 to 2014, it never went above 200,000 until right here. Do you see it? It went right above 200,000, and look what it did. It fixed itself. I'm not even saying that this was healthy, but this was pretty much the standard ratio for the world. And then all of a sudden, right here, it explodes. If you've ever seen the documentary 13th, if you've ever read the book, The New Jim Crow, both of those break it down. Right here, they created what they called the war on drugs. But what we've all come to understand is there was never a war on drugs, it was a war on people. That literally, and they unpack this in the documentary 13th, they unpack how literally the director of policy for Richard Nixon admitted openly that they tried to figure out how can we make it illegal to be black without saying it is now illegal to be black. So they did 2 things. They started selectively enforcing laws only in black communities, and then created not hundreds, not thousands, but tens of thousands of new laws that would almost exclusively be applied in communities of color. And it exploded. And people like to say that our justice system is broken, and I understand why you would think that. This right here is the justice system being broken. I was like, yeah, something's wrong here. It's not normal anymore. This isn't broken. This was on purpose. This was built. Like, have you ever, like, the second semester in college said, you know what, I'm gonna try to be valedictorian. And then you realize, like, oh, I probably should have made my mind up to do that first semester. Because, like, if you decide second semester, it's too late. Like, to be valedictorian, you have to do that on purpose. Like, you can't build a highway on accident. You can't build a home on accident. And this looks like a big blob on the screen, but this is one of the most complex creations ever made in this country. It's 10,000 police departments. It's 20,000 jails. It's millions of laws. And it was built on purpose. Right now, the United States has the highest rate of imprisonment of any country in the world. I love Rwanda, but it's important that I just showed you that Rwanda just experienced genocide, and the country that's right behind the United States is the country that just experienced genocide. So there's a country that emerged from genocide and then us. What does that tell you about the spirit and essence of this place? This is not only the highest rate of imprisonment, not only do we have more people in prison than any country in the world, we have more people in prison today than any country in the history of the world. And it's an old world. You live in that time. That's the time you live. That's where we live. We live there. If we're getting better and better over time, that would not explain how we got here. Here is a better explanation of where we are. Now, real quick, somebody designed this slide for me, and then I designed this one myself. So there's like a major drop-off in quality. This is the professional slide, and here's the Shaun King special right here. I'm gonna leave you with this, and I'll close and take questions. We are in a dip in the quality of humanity. Listen, I don't know for sure if we're here or here or here or here, but I tell you what I damn sure know, we're not here. I know for sure that we're not here. I know that we're either here and going down here, or I know that we are in a dip in the quality of humanity in this country. It's disturbing. You feel it in your bones. You know it. You're reminded of it every single day, and it's a problem. I'm going to tell you a few things about this dip. The dip can be easy to get into, but very hard to get out of. That's one characteristic of the dip. People consistently underestimate how hard it's going to be to get out of it. Today, I see people believing that if Donald Trump will be impeached or defeated in 2020, that means we're out of the dip. And if you believe that, you didn't understand the dip in the first place. Because this right here, hell, this chart was created before he was even president. Now, he loves this. He can tell you he doesn't, but he's benefited from it. He may love systemic and be empowered by systemic inequity in this country, but he didn't create it. Donald Trump, in reality, he was elected because we were already somewhere in this area. He is a symptom of where we already were. Now, he is simultaneously a cause that takes us farther down. He started as a symptom, now he's a cause. Easy to get there, hard to get out of. I'll tell you something frightening and then something hopeful. The frightening thing is these dips can last for a few years. They can last for decades. They can also last for hundreds of years. If you think about the transatlantic slave trade under the concept of it being a dip in the quality of humanity, that was a 300-year dip. What's hopeful is, yes, there are dips. Human beings always fight themselves out of the dip. Just as you could not build mass incarceration on accident, you also cannot get out of this on accident. It's too hard. Closing slide, and I'll tell you how to detect a dip with my funny illustration here. Whenever there is an innovation in society that disturbs the primary people in power, ugliness always follows. It's consistent throughout human history. I'll give you 3 American illustrations. I wish I had more time to unpack them. Let's say that this line is 1619. The first African man is enslaved in the United States, all the way to 1863. Now, this straight line doesn't mean it's good or bad. That just means it's the status quo, okay? And there was an innovation in 1863. Do you know what that was? Well, there was a Civil War, and there was the Emancipation Proclamation. And there was the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments that followed in the years to follow. Now, that innovation, where all of a sudden millions of human beings were no longer allowed to be technically, that's what 13th is about, were no longer technically allowed to be enslaved. All of a sudden, you see after the Emancipation Proclamation something that you hardly ever saw during slavery. It was about a 50-year period of horrible lynching. Slavery is, hold on, let me go back, I'm sorry. Slavery was horrible, but why were enslaved Africans not lynched during slavery? It was a profitable enterprise. All of a sudden, when you removed the profit motive, you saw this ugly era of lynching, okay? So then after Reconstruction, the Civil War, Reconstruction, other things, we have almost another 100 years of Jim Crow segregation. And then there was an innovation. It was the Civil Rights Movement. A beautiful, powerful movement, and a lot of that movement happened right here in North Carolina. Right, for real. And there was an innovation, and the Civil Rights Movement introduced many innovations, but two of those, at least there are dozens, two of them was the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. But there was a dip in response to that. That dip was mass incarceration. Mass incarceration is a response to the gains of the Civil Rights Movement. Let me tell you the one we were in now. There were 43 of these. Anybody want to guess? Presidents, let's be more specific. 43 white presidents, even more specific. 43 white male presidents. That's a lot of white male presidents. 43 times, 43 white men elected president. And in 2008, we say, you know what, let's be a little innovative and mix it up a little bit. And we literally elected who may be the most unique black man in the history of black men. I remember when I first learned about Barack Obama, it was probably maybe 2002, and people were talking about him. And then I remember when he spoke at the Democratic Convention, and I remember I asked somebody, I said, man, where is he from? And again, the name Barack Obama just slides off our tongue right now, but that was a new name to us. Barack Hussein Obama was doubly new, particularly post 9/11. It was like, I asked him, I said, where's he from? And a friend told me, he's from the south side of Chicago. And the Nation of Islam is on the south side of Chicago. I was like, oh, he must have converted, like with the Nation or something, which is a regular story of people, you know, Barack Hussein Obama from south side of Chicago. And I was like, wow, he must have converted or something like that. And they said, well, no, he's actually not from south side of Chicago. He's actually from Hawaii. I said, Hawaii? Like, I didn't even know that black folk lived in Hawaii. And they said, well, he's from Hawaii, but his father is Kenyan. I was like, oh, okay. His father, so his father's like, no, I said, no, his father is an African scholar from Kenya. His mother was a white hippie from Kansas. And he actually lived in Indonesia. I was like, what the hell? Like, that the man has a biography. Like, it is a biography that only one human being has. And we say, you know what, look, we've done white men for 43 times. We're going to elect the most unique black man in the history of black men. And we said, let's do it. We cried, we screamed, we were proud. I'm not even talking about politics, I'm talking about humanity. It was like people, all of a sudden, you could see yourself. It was just a moment, like, yeah, this is great. But anytime you have an innovation that disturbs the primary people in power, they always act out. One man almost right away started acting out. Donald Trump started lying and saying he sent private investigators to Hawaii to find the fake birth certificate and all of this stuff. And off of the back of questioning whether or not Barack Obama was actually an American, Donald Trump somehow shape-shifted himself from a bad reality TV show host who literally frequently appeared in wrestling pay-per-views. He is now the president of the United States. Trust this. If John Kerry was elected as the 44th president, there would not have been a Donald Trump. If Al Gore had been elected the 44th president, there would not. Donald Trump is a result of the dip that Barack Obama followed him. This is my closing thought. Barack Obama said something painful that broke my heart. He said in his first interview with the New Yorker, he said, first interview out of the Oval Office, he said, I'm starting to wonder if I was elected 10 or 20 years before the country was ready for me. And I know why he thought that, but I don't think it's true at all. I think had he been elected 20 years from now, it would have been the same. It would have been the same result. But what he's struggling with is, did my election act as some type of impetus to this current place? He's not responsible for that, and he's not to blame or no fault. But that's where we are. We are in this dip. The dip is an all-time high in hate crimes. The hate crimes are now at the highest rate they've been in any of our lifetimes, which blows my mind. Last year, over 40,000 people were shot and killed in this country, which is the longest in almost all of your lifetime. Like I said, we're in a dip. And here's what I know. We will remain in that dip until we organize and fight ourselves out of it. I have some questions that I'm gonna answer. Where are those questions? Let me see. Oh, let me check them out. Thank you if you submitted questions. Oh, okay. Oh, which presidential candidate do I endorse? Let me talk for a second. Nobody now. Let me first say before I answer that we have long since thought that the election of a president was the answer to our problems. I am nothing but glad that Barack Obama was our president. But if electing a president solved our problems, he'd have solved them. If you read, there's a new book that I would love for you to read, by James Foreman Jr. His father was James Foreman, a civil rights legend. James Foreman Jr. is a brilliant professor at Yale Law School, and the book is called Locking Up Our Own. And to me, there are three books that I would love for you to, there are dozens of books that I would love for you to read, but if you want to read them in chronological order, you could read Slavery by Another Name, which won the Pulitzer Prize. And there's also a documentary based on that book, and you can get the bootleg version of it on YouTube, and it's not so bad. For real. Slavery by Another Name. It won the Pulitzer Prize when it came out, and it documents how literally the day after Emancipation Proclamation was written, new systems were put in place to ensure that that slavery would still be legal in the case of incarceration, in the case of the committing of a crime and all of that. It breaks that down, Slavery by Another Name, then the New Jim Crow. And then after New Jim Crow, I think you have to read Locking Up Our Own. And James Foreman Jr. basically deals with the reality that if electing a heroic presidential figure solved our problems, Obama would have solved them. And that as much as Obama loathed mass incarceration, and we could debate all the merits of that, Obama has a complicated political presidency. You can still love his humanity and critique his policy at the same time. But a president can only do so much about mass incarceration because most mass incarceration, most of the systems are local and state run. Literally over 95% of the people that are in jail or prison it's from local issues. And what locking up our own breaks down is that the system of mass incarceration it's an incredibly complicated system, and it was not just built by your enemies, it was also built by your friends. And it's a painful book, and James is a bold man for writing it, because the book addresses the reality that not only did the Democratic Party help build mass incarceration, but some of your heroes, Joe Biden included, helped, I don't just mean pass a crime bill, but helped be an architect of the system. And then it deals painfully in several chapters with the reality that local black city councils, black mayors, and the Congressional Black Caucus, listen, no, it's not I don't mean it as an indictment. Doing what they thought often would solve a crisis of drugs and violence in the 80s, a lot of good people agreed to some horrible ideas that built a monster. And to dismantle that monster requires something way more sophisticated than the election of a new, amazing president. It requires more than that. So I said all that to say, local organizing is where most change happens. Measurable, tangible change happens locally. And by local, I even mean on this campus, where there are ways for you to affect policy on this campus. You could begin, like there are people fighting for their colleges and universities to divest from private prisons, from fossil fuels. There are policies that you could fight to change. You could fight for change here in the Raleigh-Durham area and fight for change on that level. In North Carolina, Lord knows, North Carolina. North Carolina is like the new Mississippi. And I mean, Mississippi is still the Mississippi. But North Carolina is, but thankfully North Carolina has such a rich organizing tradition and culture. Mississippi does too, that organizers have been able to fight back creatively and not just win elections, but fight back against policies. I will say this about the 2020 presidential race. It needs to be the 2016 Democratic primary historically was one of the strangest primaries ever. There was really only one serious candidate. Now I've campaigned for Bernie Sanders. I know Bernie Sanders, but when he entered, it was almost a joke. Like when he entered, the day after he entered, he was polling at 3%. And Hillary Clinton had around 85%. It was like, when he announced his candidacy, he literally like didn't comb his hair and went out into the, like right in front of the Senate with a single microphone and like said like 2 sentences, and it hardly made the news. And so people were discouraged from even running against Hillary Clinton. I had several friends who were friends with Elizabeth Warren, and she wanted to run and was told specifically not to run. It wasn't her time, that type of thing. And several people with Joe Biden was discouraged from running, and he didn't. So they made their own decisions not to run. But what happened was a historically peculiar primary. And the best way to become president is to emerge from a competitive, healthy primary. When Barack Obama won in 2008, he earned that. Like, he literally ran against Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton to win that. When he started in the polls, he started as 5th. Like, in the first Iowa polls, he was in 7th. And literally, even people like John Lewis endorsed Hillary Clinton. And then eventually walked it back and said, you know what, I changed my mind. Because it was, But there were multiple governors, multiple senators. It was a competitive primary. This primary is going to be a competitive primary. I'll get very specific. I would love for someone like Andrew Gillum to run, someone like Stacey Abrams to run. People can, I don't want to hear this whole, it's not their time. Today, a 36-year-old white man who's the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, announced he's running. And he's actually a kind, great guy. I messaged with him earlier today, but it's like, if he can run, Andrew Gillum can run, Stacey Abrams, it's like, okay, oh, everybody's running? It's like, oh, okay, is that how we're gonna do this? It's like, all right, we need to recruit, if it's just anybody can run, but it's gonna be a competitive. I love Julian Castro. People are underestimating him. Julian so far is the only person announced that he's running that has a black campaign manager. He hired literally a brilliant black organizer to be his campaign manager. Kamala Harris just announced that she is running. So it's going to be an amazing competitive primary. And here's my plan. My plan is once everybody announces, I'm studying all of the staff hires that they make. I already had said I wrote a story about it. I said on the radio, I will not endorse any candidate who hires a senior team of all white men to guide their campaign. And so, like Elizabeth Warren just made her chief of staff, an amazing black woman coming from the Obama administration. Like, there's some brilliant senior staffers being hired. I'm looking at that. But once all of the candidates announce, I plan on endorsing somebody probably that week. And I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to wait for the debates. I already know who's who. I already know what they stand for. I'm going to look at their staffs, look at their policies, and I'm just going to jump in head first. It's just me. I'm going to jump in head first, and I'm going to fight. So I think we'll know all the first debates are this summer. So I think we'll know probably by March who everybody's going to run, and then I'm going to endorse somebody in March, and I'm going to go. Some of you are going to love me, some of you are going to hate me, because I'm going to endorse somebody, and I'm just going to go for it. Because what we can't afford to do is just allow other people to make all these decisions for us, where we have no influence in no. This time, instead of being outsiders and just looking at what they do, I think we should all just jump right on in there and get all the way involved so we can influence and shape how that whole thing goes. All right, next question. Yeah. How do I feel about the government shutdown? Oh, you have another? Give me one more question. Give me one more question. That's it? Okay, 1 second, okay? The government shutdown, I'm fine with that question. It's an easy answer. The government shutdown is very disturbing. Again, I said it's hard to know a moment in history when you're in it. We are now in the longest government shutdown in American history, particularly outside of, even during the Civil War, the government still operated. It's like, so y'all could operate during the Civil War, but you can't operate now? I think that there is something much more nefarious at play. Donald Trump tipped his hand a couple times. One, when he's not savvy, and so he regularly tips his hand. And when he said in December that this is my shutdown, and he said, literally, he said, you can call this the Trump shutdown. When he said that, what he revealed was this was always his intention. He owned it. And he'll never be able to divorce himself because he spoke so plainly and so clearly. Put that there. A week after he said that, he then made a comment on how most of the employees were Democrats. And when he said that, again, he tipped his hand that he doesn't have he's not a compassionate human being, that he sees this as this won't hurt my base. Also, what he was really, there is no political breakdown of government workers. That's also a racial comment, because government employees, a huge percentage of them are people of color, and he knows that's a Democratic base. He's also referencing D.C. the blackness of D.C. bothers him. And so he's talking about all of those things. One step further, I think he is okay with the government being shut down because many of the people, places, and functions of government that aren't working right now are things that could concern him, the investigation. The Justice Department just announced yesterday that the shutdown is starting to affect the quality of their work. It's like, I don't think he's bothered even in the least bit. And you can just read his tone-deaf tweets thanking government workers. Like, it's like, we don't need you to thank them. You literally have the power to open the government right now. Yesterday, Democrats in the House voted for the 10th time to reopen the government. The Senate has not voted once on this. So there's no way to put this on Democrats. Trump owned it. The Senate hasn't even voted. Hey, young lady, what's your question? Right. No, I love King, and I hope all of you have seen North Carolina's own Reverend Barber, who I hope you saw the video where the governor of Tennessee was right behind him, and he just literally turned and looked at the governor, and he said, I don't mean he wasn't suggesting, he spoke to the governor, you have to see it, saying how troublesome it is for for politicians to get on the mic and say they love King when they enact policies and things that are antithetical to who King was. And literally he said, since you're here, Governor, like right, I mean, it was a bold moment. When I hear that, so King has so many, like, I watched several sermons of his this past weekend, and he was so brilliant. And that quote from King is perplexing because it suggests something that I think is true. Let me show you. Let me go all the way back. Sorry if we've gone on long. Let me see. It suggests, hold on. Let me show it this way. I think when King says that the arc of the universe, that it bends towards justice, I think an interpretation of that is there is always justice, but it's hard when you may not experience it yourself. I think what my interpretation of that is, like, in dips, humanity always gets out of the dip, and this is something like justice. But when you live in these times, King did say something that broke my heart. He had another speech where he critiqued his I Have a Dream speech. And he started saying in the speech that I think some of that might have been superficial because he realized that some parts of that dream might be impossible. I said it to say that a lot of what King said was said in hope. It was aspirational. His hope was, he didn't use the word hope in that quote, but I think he's saying, I hope it bends toward justice. Because a lot of, here's a man who lost his life to an injustice. But I think he could have literally, not to be religious right now, he could have literally even been thinking of heaven. Like, he tended to not just he tried to fight for justice on earth and believed we deserved it on earth. But in some of his sentences, some of his quotes are fatalistic as well. So I hope that the arc of our universe bends towards justice, but it's hard when Eric Garner, the man who killed Eric Garner, Officer Daniel Pantaleo, still has his job and the city still says it's under investigation. And it's like in the most liberal city in America. It's like, how's that? I hope it's true. I think we should always fight as if justice is possible. Even, and that is hard. I have lost way more than I have won in every fight and battle than I've like, the victories are few, far, like, and rare, but you still have to fight as if victory is possible. I'll close with this, and thank you for having me. You have to make a decision that you aren't going to stay here. And it's not I mean that in the deepest possible way, that not just, I hope we get out of here, but you have to say, I'm going to help us fight our way out of here. And it has to be something that you act on. It has to be something that you have to start tilting your whole life toward that direction. And I hope you do. I believe in you. I believe I got a chance to even speak to some organizers here at Duke. Keep fighting for what you're fighting for. I know so many local organizers here in North Carolina. I believe in you as well. I see good things on the horizon. I'm encouraged by many of the victories. I don't just mean congressional victories, but even local policies that were fought for and passed, statewide ballot initiatives and other things that were passed. There are some brilliant new district attorneys in North Carolina, including like total game changers here in North Carolina that can help change the system from the inside out. And so there's just so much for us to fight for, but continue to organize, continue to fight for it, and I'll have your back, all right? God bless you.